Hi, it's Dan, and welcome to another episode of Smuggling Hope. And I really appreciate you joining me, on YouTube and on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and wherever I'm being hosted right now. So I appreciate you staying with us. We're trying to maintain and continue to provide the best kind of content so that people have Catholic counsel for their community and to share this information with their families, to share this with people that they know, people that are having all different types of struggles. And I appreciate you guys, sending me, your questions and comments. Your questions and ideas generate sometimes the topics of discussion or the content that we generate on the program. Super helpful that you guys, go on and you click subscribe on YouTube or on Spotify, and that if you feel like I'm worth it, to give us a 5-star review, because that keeps bumping up, the algorithm, so that people can easily find this, that it becomes suggested to them. And so thank you for doing that. And as we normally do, ensuring that, again, if you have more topics, just send them my way. Now, before I get into today's program, I want to, give a shout out to the online marriage program that we do have available for you, and you can try it whenever you'd like. But this is something that I would want to get into the hands of as many Catholic married couples as possible, whether you're planning to get married, whether you've been married for decades. You want to check out heartsrenewed.org, right? And these things that are available there are incredible for you to improve your communication with your spouse, the confidence. We'll talk a little bit about on the program today how to improve your confidence and get less anxious in your marriage, so that you have the ability to have courageous conversations. And you partner with your spouse so that the conflict around parenting or financial stress or whatever it is you're working on, resolve that, and really teaching couples how to grow in intimacy and connection. So all that is there at heartsrenewed.org. Again, stuff that you can access from the comfort of your own home. And the coupon code that's in the show notes is Renew1. If you type in Renew1, that will give you the ability to look at the program for the first 7 days for just $1. So it's well worth it. Like I said, I don't know how much you can get done in the program in a week, but do as much as you can. Like I said, I think people, once they try it, everybody that's tried it has purchased the program, right? So I guess I appreciate everybody for taking a look at that. And if you want access to the free resources or the podcast, it's all there at heartsrenewed.org. Okay, so on to today's show. So the topic of today is entitled Idols and Eggshells. And in many ways, this episode really has to do with the fact that most of the sin in our lives comes down to idolatry, and we produce and make idols of the people in our life. Our spouses, our parents, our children, our bosses. We can make our bodies our God. We can make money our God. We worship something. All people worship something. It's inescapable. Even if they profess to be atheists, people will find a way to worship something. And oftentimes the gods that that they're engaged with are not loving. And what they do, if it's not the one true God, it diminishes the quality of their life. They become obsessed with their body. They become obsessed with money. They become obsessed with their spouse, become obsessed with their kids, and their ability to enjoy their life goes down. And so I think, in our conversation today, I want to talk about how to break out of this idolatry, because when you have this idolatry, you've made a person your God. It actually makes it, that you have an intense amount of anxiety in that relationship. Hence the term eggshells, right? Walking on eggshells, right? I feel like I got to walk on eggshells with my husband or my wife or my kids. I don't want them to yell at me, or at work. So to start off, I want to give you a little story, and this is a story that maybe I've used on the podcast before, but I like it. It is one of the images that I want to eventually incorporate into the introduction to the program on YouTube. I just got to find it in Illustrator to help me out with that. If anybody knows somebody who's into doing illustration, in terms of video stuff, drop me a line. But the story comes from, the church mystics and saints, and it's about the early life of Jesus. So Jesus, Mary, and Joseph had to escape into the land of Egypt. If you're familiar, Jesus was a baby and they had to go into Egypt. And when they went into Egypt in the evening, they passed through the different statues, these giant statues, these monoliths that reflected the pagan deities, the pagan gods of Egypt, right? Ra and Osiris and all of these different giant statues. And as the Holy Family went by those statues in front of God made man in the form of this little baby Jesus, these things began to crumble and fall apart and fall down. So much so that it caused a scandal because the Egyptians thought, as this family came in, these refugees came in, that they were cursed, right? Why else would these gods crumble before them? They must be cursed. And so again, the story goes that it was actually kind of hard for a long time. I don't know if Joseph ever really was stable financially. I don't think he ever was stable, period, financially, because that's not the way God, the Father, wanted it to be. But it was very hard for him to find work because the Egyptians didn't trust them because of that, that beginning of that experience where they were, those idols fell at the feet of God. And that's super important that we keep that image in mind, is that at the core is there needs to be a clarity over what we're choosing to worship in our life. Because if there's confusion about this, then we start to align ourselves and align our energy with things that will consume us or will produce anxiety. So the first thing I want you to maybe like reflect on or take away. So there's two types of logic that the human person experiences, right? So one type of logic is what we call the logic of consequence. And that is the logic that makes most people anxious, right? And it works like this. If I do this, what will my wife think? If I do this, what will my husband think? If I do this, what will my boss think? What will the people at church think? What will my kids think? What will this person I'm going on a date with think? And so what the logic of consequence does is it makes us very attentive to and receptive to behaviors of other people, the outcomes that we're trying to drive outside of ourselves, right? We want, if we're a waiter, we want the people who are going to give us a tip to give us a tip at the end of the service, right? So we're going to be very focused on the patron at the restaurant because you want to make sure that they're happy. And so oftentimes it starts as a conscientiousness, starts as a general interest in trying to be agreeable. Oftentimes this can be very difficult for women because personality-wise, women are generally, not all, but generally women are usually more agreeable than men. Men have higher rates of disagreeableness. It doesn't mean that they're any better or worse with this logic of consequence. And so, again, we're always putting our confidence outside ourselves, even though we don't see it, because we're focused on an outcome that we don't realize it, but we can't control it, right? Because at the end of the day, I can't control how my spouse feels about me. I can't control how my child feels about me, my boss, my classmates, people at work. And so if I'm continuing to conform my behaviors, my attitudes, and I'm constricting it to try to please these other people, it's going to create a lot of anxiety because I'm in a constant state of preparation. That's what anxiety is this preparatory emotion, and waiting to find out how are they going to act, what they need, all of that stuff, and that's very challenging. The difficult part about it is that it works, right? The logic of consequence works in the sense that I can get the patron at the restaurant to give me a tip by being a really good waiter or waitress. I can sometimes, when I'm a kid, be very good and obedient and kind and get my parents to like me. But let's say I go to work with somebody who is a jerk, or I date somebody who is a terrible person. Well, now I'm going to be taken advantage of because that person, right? A lot of times, very, very pathological individuals, they seek out very kind, loving, genteel people to have relationships with, and they almost feel like that they almost feel entitled. In my experiences with the forensic population, people who are involved in crime, and just let's just say that they're engaged in a lot of nefarious stuff, they almost seek out relationships with very kind or gentle people to almost teach them a lesson. That's almost like, well, you're so naive, I'm here to school you. And the logic of consequence doesn't serve them, right? Because they're so focused on trying to win this person's affections, but well, this person has got an evil bent. And so it creates a real level of disharmony. And so we we can get into problems. That's one version of problems, but there are many. But the issue is that with that logic of consequence, we form an idolatry with people where we make them our God. We start to conform our life to this other ever-changing system of relationships. We make our parents our God, then we make our teachers our God, then we make our boyfriend and girlfriend our God, and on and on and on. And again, like I said, it's not limited to people, but in the case of our discussion today, we're really trying to break out of this relationship pattern with people. So this is a huge problem, right? Because now with people, we start to form a level of anxiety, and so the logic of consequence is the first thing, right? And so what we want to do is we want to break out of that, because we don't want our confidence cannot be connected to things that are outside of our control. If your confidence is connected to things outside of your control, you always feel a level of agitation, and it always makes you feel weaker. So we need to reestablish a sense of confidence and measure what we can control. And so what we do is we want to replace that with the logic of appropriateness. In psychological terms, the logic of appropriateness means I start to consult inside, in the sense that I start thinking about and questioning the image of who I want to be, in the sense of, well, the man I want to be at the end of my life, how do they handle this? The father, the husband that I want to be, how do they love their child or their wife, or how do they operate at work? And so I break out of this. Focus, where I am, looking to people for confidence. People are no longer a requirement for my confidence. It is me living with integrity and an alignment with the image of the person I want to be at the end of my life. And this is a huge component, right? And so why does this happen in marriages a lot? Is, well, in the beginning, people fall in love and they become very attentive to the needs of the other person. They think that attentiveness and the reception of that attentiveness, right, you being so lovey-dovey and responsive and attentive to your spouse, is going to keep them interested in you long term. But in truth, like, you focusing and always caring for and always being dawdling on your spouse, sometimes what that does is it weakens the relationship, right? Because, like, your wife doesn't want you to make her your God, right? I think there's this temptation to, like, simp on your wife. Simping, the word simp is a slang term that really, I mean, I guess the old terminology would be like to be whipped, in the sense that, like, you're not in control of your relationship with your wife. Usually it's in a negative term, right? But it just means that you've emasculated yourself in a very crude way. And so men, the more that they make their wives their God, well, again, like, the wife doesn't want to be the God. If you're dating somebody and they want you to make them your husband wants to make himself your God, right? That he's the ultimate authority on everything. Well, that's limiting. And if your wife wants you, or your girlfriend, or wants you to make her your God, well, that's also dangerous, because that's limiting. People are bad destinations. And I get into this very much in depth, and we do a bunch of different exercises in the Hearts Renewed program, because it really is destructive. Because if you and your spouse are looking to each other to perpetually make each other feel confident, well, that's going to really deaden your relationship quick and frustrate you. And it's also going to make you humiliated in your marriage or anxious of each other, because you just can't keep that going, not indefinitely. And so what we want to do is we want to try to we have to, again, connect to this logic of appropriateness, thinking about the person that we want to be at the end of our life. Because realistically, what we understand psychologically is your happiness and fulfillment has to do with, are you on track with that person? Is your life and your behaviors aligned with the man or the woman that you want to be at the end of your life? So if you're listening to this podcast and you're single, or you're listening to this podcast and you're divorced, or again, this is important, is that your happiness and fulfillment is not linked to your relationship status. Super important, because some people think, like, their happiness, and again, happiness is a product of my relationship status, and the truth is it's not. It's wonderful to be in relationship, and obviously many people find that fulfilling, but it is not a precondition for the fulfillment of human beings. Realistically, your happiness potential, your ability to be happy, is pretty stable, actually. And because we don't control other people, they move in and out of our lives, right? Even if you're married to the same person for 60 years and you've had a wonderful life, they eventually will leave you. One of you will leave and die, and you'll have those memories, of course, but after 60 years of marriage, hopefully you're closer to that man that you wanted to be, or that woman that you wanted to be. And that's why if you do find a spouse, or you're dating, or you're looking to foster some type of relationship or romance, you really need to be clear first about who you want to become. And like when I talk to people, like I think this is a huge thing that's missing in the education of young people is they ask them, what do you want to do when you grow up? What are you going to do to provide for yourself? What are you interested in? All of that's nice, but it is not as important in terms of unifying the mind of the person and producing a direction as getting that image correct. Because if you don't have that image, what happens is marketing takes over. Like if you don't know who you want to become, somebody will tell you who you're supposed to be. And so now, Instagram shows up and tells you that you need to look like this, dress like this, right? Which leads a lot of young women and women of all ages down rabbit holes of endless comparison. And it's just madness, right? And for men, they don't know who they want to become, so they build castles to nowhere, right? There's all these men right now. They're on podcasts, they're on Instagram, they're doing all of these talk shows. They'll all be dead. I'll be dead. We're all going to be dead at some point. Very few of us, if any, will be actually remembered in 50 years. It'd be very rare if I'm remembered 50 years after my death. That would be wonderful. Hopefully, my children or grandchildren will remember me in some degree. But this life is very short. And so I have to have a correct aim in my life. And so just to have this aim of just trying to achieve worldly fame is something that you cannot control, believe it or not. It is a quality of a person's life, right? Celebrity is a quality of a person's life for people to recognize you. And it actually is a diminishment, right? You do not have as much freedom because once people think that you're just supposed to act a certain way, to challenge that is to alter and lose your celebrity. And many people build their life, their stability around their celebrity, right? Look at all the Hollywood celebrities. It's very hard for them to walk away. And I think that that's something that I've found very telling, right? So you see all these people and they're built castles to nowhere, right? It's important for you to figure out, well, who do you really want to be? And I think that if you can get clarity over that earlier, then your life starts to compound with confidence and you have a clarity of vision, right? If you don't have that clarity, you can be easily manipulated by the world, by the need for security, the need to impress other people, all of that stuff. And that's something that I think we have to maintain, right? Rick Moranis, who, if you've ever watched like the Honey I Shrunk the Kids movies when you're a kid, he was the father in Honey I Shrunk the Kids. If you've ever watched that and certain things, he disappeared from Hollywood at one point because I do believe he had like 4 kids at the time, and then his wife got stricken with cancer, and so he just left acting altogether to raise his kids and take care of his wife while she was dying from cancer. And I don't know if he ever really returned to acting, but he maintained, again, I don't know, I'm not going to canonize the man, but I think it's a unique thing where he was able to do what is very hard, which is to leave celebrity. 'Cause I mean, he was at the top of his game, I would think, celebrity-wise. At that time, he was in blockbuster movies, but he understood what his priorities are. So if we know what our image of who we want to be is, we understand and can keep our priorities. Now, why is this so important? Well, priorities allow us to know how to balance our life. And so this is important because balance is not a stable state. It's not a psychological state, right? So people would be like, well, are you in balance? Well, balance is an active thing where I'm constantly doing things to establish balance, right? It's like a top, it has to spin. And it generates kind of like a tornado. But the way that things spiral up is through prioritization and figuring out what is essential in my life to become the man that I want to be. So if I don't take care of my sleep, if I don't pray correctly, sleep correctly and pray, I'm not going to get into the specifics of how to pray or how not to pray, but there are better qualities of sleep for sure. But if I'm not eating correctly, if I'm not spending time with friends or my spouse, or I'm not doing certain things in a certain type of I'm going to be having problems, right? And so my mentor would always say like that. Balance is like your car keys. You always notice it when you lose it, right? You don't notice except when you lose it. So you're depressed or you're upset or you're angry or you're acting out of character, and we hear that you're acting out of character. And so in people's marriages and in the relationships, they start to say things, right? Your son comes home from work and he says, "My boss is an idiot. He makes me so mad." The thing is that your boss, your spouse, your kids, no one has the authority to make you do anything. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to help you win an argument when you say that, when, telling your wife or telling your boss or telling your husband, "Oh, I can't make you feel anything." Well, that's probably not going to be helpful. So don't use that as a tactic. But if you're listening to this at a sober point of your day today, maintain the idea that people do not have the authority to influence you to the degree that they make you manifest behaviors. That is a choice. At some point, you consent to that. You make that person matter to that degree, and that is how bullying happens, right? So for those of you listening to this that also have young kids, or you feel bullied at work or bullied in school, bullying happens because we put so much of this stock in other people. We're so fixated on that logic of consequence. We're like, well, what do they think? What do they think? What do they think? We become an easy mark at work. We become an easy mark. We're so agreeable, we're definitely going to be bullied, right? It's always like, we worry about what people think. Well, now they're going to pick on me, right? Because the other person who has no confidence but is aggressive is going to find the people who have no confidence and are avoidant. And the avoidant people get attacked by the aggressive people. But the bullies, like, they have no confidence either. They're not connected to anything that necessarily matters, and they're worried about people seeing them in a different light, them being seen as a failure or insecure or inefficient. And you'll see this whenever people get into bullying patterns. They're very insecure, right? Because they're not connected to reality. They're not connected to goals in their own life. And it doesn't matter. You don't have to be a 12-year-old, and you could be a 40-year-old, you could be a 50-year-old. It doesn't matter. You know, it's odd. They had I know it's an odd experience for you and for me. As people, we want to activate an image of ourselves, be very clear about the woman or the man that you want to be, and start. When people come to me for counsel, I will say this, and this is really part of, I guess, the framework for me, is to help people establish that working image. Because in counseling, we're counseling, people, there has to be a destination, right? Therapy comes from this word from the Greek, which means to accompany people towards the temple, right? So in Greek culture, therapy meant to accompany. The therapist's job was to accompany a sick person, a patient, from the village, wherever they were, on pilgrimage to the temple. And at the temple, they would either receive healing or they would prepare for death. But everything that was going to happen to them happened at the temple. It wasn't the therapist that did it. Their job was to keep them on track, make sure they didn't die along the way, make sure they didn't get robbed. And they knew the lay of the land, so that it was traveling together, traversing the terrain. And so as a counselor, though, I don't know necessarily where these people are all going to meet God, encounter the truth. But I want people to encounter the image of who God has made them to be at the end of their life. Who is it that you want to become? And that really is moving towards that will be holiness, will be a full life. It will not be diminished, but it will be difficult. And so if you have that image, right, that is the best replacement that I can offer people, is then you start to draw counsel from the person that you want to be. And some of us can generate that easily. Some of us really need time, and the relationships with other people in the community to foster that, whether it's your priest or your family members or professionals, to be present with you. But you need to cultivate that. You need to think about who you want to be at the end of your life. And right now in my field, most of my field believes that you will never die. They don't want to talk about death. They don't want to believe suffering is real. There's always a way to escape, to create a different reality. It's very odd. Suffering is seen as something that can be thwarted or avoided, but that's just not how life works. To remove suffering is to sterilize life. Then there's nothing that matters. Nothing matters. Everything that matters has to cost something. There has to be innate risk. There has to be risk and sacrifice. Otherwise, why do anything? Why have kids? Why not have kids? Why start a business? Why go into medical school? We just don't do anything. And so now you have a culture of young people, ever growing young people, that have no interest to do anything. They have no ambition. They have no ambition. They don't want to date. They don't want to ask people out on dates. They don't want to have families. They don't have children. They don't want to go on for education. They don't want to be in the workforce, and on and on and on. It's very crazy. So going back to this, we want to get clarity over that image of who we want to be so we can easily say, well, that woman or that man that I want to be, what did they do in this situation, so that I have confidence as I move towards that person. Because regardless of all the things in life that are out of my control, I can always move towards that person. But I have to spend time reflecting on who I want to become. And you got to remember that a lot of people, they don't really care about that person because they have no knowledge of who that person is. It's really a sacred image because you are the only one really who has a clarity of that. Now you might have loved ones, a spouse, friends, children that will encourage you, and they know when you're off track, but they can't tell you exactly about who you're supposed to be. Nobody can do that. If they did, they would remove your freedom, and that wouldn't be fun. So it's super, super powerful for people to start towards the person that they want to be. Now, what this does is it produces a vehicle for confidence to come into your relationship, whether you're in high school and dealing with bullies, whether you're in a marriage and you're upset by your husband or your wife's behavior or their lack of affection or their avoidance or their aggression or their poor coping skills. Maybe they've got alcoholism, maybe they got anger problems, maybe your wife overspends, maybe your kids aren't always excited to see you. Again, this can happen in any relationship, but you need to see that confidence cannot be expected to come from relationship because it's not consistent. It is not going to be a stable vehicle for confidence to come into your life. So realize that. Super, super important. Because in order to speak the truth, which we'll talk about in a second, you have to have a sense of stable confidence. Otherwise, what occurs is you do not communicate the truth in these relationships and you get angry or depressed or anxious because people are not being directed into reality. We're just trying to make everybody happy. And making everybody happy makes everybody very confused, right? Now we live in I guess we call it a morally relativistic society where there is no right, wrong, good, bad. It's whatever you feel. And we don't want to offend people, so we don't actually want to help people. We don't want to offend people, so we just tell them that they're wonderful. And what this does is it makes people more ill. It's like closeted apathy. This idea that I care about you, well, I'm hurting. Well, it's a very intense level of apathy. It is one thing to withhold judgment, but to withhold judgment doesn't mean that we forget about reality or what the truth is. It means that because we have to move people. If we love people, we will the good for people, and really, to will nothing for people is really to will evil upon people. Believe it or not, that's why apathy is actually worse. Apathy is actually worse than hate. Hate requires an interest. Hate requires an intensity in engagement. I loved this person or I felt strongly about this person first and now I hate them. Apathy is the opposite of love. A lot of times people get that wrong. They think that hate is the opposite of love. So get an idea of that image. That's an important thing. Now, because that will give you confidence, so you will not be as concerned about what these people are saying and doing as it relates to you. Because once you're confident, then you can survey for reality, right? So in that image that I gave you where your spouse is just doing things that you don't like, maybe they're drinking too much, or maybe there's a bully at school and you can't control, what we're doing is we're breaking this fixation on this person, this need for validation. And that's what it comes down to, is that people feel this intense need for validation. And it's not coming because my spouse is drunk. It's not coming because this person bullies me. They don't support me. Or they half support me, but then they stab me in the back and they get a kick out of it. The validation cannot come from people. Now the vehicle for validation and confidence comes from that movement of myself towards the person I want to be. And so you need to think about what are the behaviors that are going to propel me to feel like I'm becoming that person. So, and this is the work of identity formation. Your identity is really formed up by the habits of behavior that you have. So, for instance, years ago, I worked with a woman who was a fashion model, but she would say that she felt ugly, so ugly that she wanted to kill herself, and she would cut herself, and she had all types of problems. And objectively, you have to think, well, how, and this is a tricky thing. She said she wanted to be an attractive person, which, again, objectively, people were paying her to do things, to wear their clothes and to take photos of her because they found her to be an aesthetically pleasing person. But she couldn't stand herself. She couldn't stand herself. She would get back from photo shoots and then she would, get high as a kite. Now, the point of this is that her behaviors outside of a photo shoot, I mean, attractive people, do they do photo shoots? And the answer is that's too vague. That's a subjective representation. Sure, the photographer thought that I was attractive. Sure, this other person thought I was attractive. But do I think I'm attractive? And the answer was no. She was doing cocaine. She was smoking cigarettes. It was like the model diet, right? She wasn't eating anything. And she hung out with really abusive men. And the reason why she hung out with these abusive men was because they had the ability to say no to her, right? And that's a whole other podcast about why women, especially very attractive women, sometimes end up with bad boys, so to speak, because women, they need men to demonstrate confidence, and these men, in a warped way, sometimes evidence what a woman would confuse as being confident, right? But so she was involved in these experiences that made her feel ugly. So if she's an attractive person, what do attractive people do? Well, they go to the gym. What do attractive people do? Well, they care about themselves. Well, what do? Well, they spend time with their friends. People that love themselves, what do they do? Because it evolved to that conversation of loving yourself, right? If you loved yourself, what would you do? Well, I would sleep appropriately, right? Then I wouldn't have to put on all this makeup because I wouldn't look like a zombie. Okay. If you loved yourself and you were a person and believed that you were an attractive person, what else would be different? Well, I would be able to avoid some of these other relationships or these experiences because I would hold myself to a higher standard and believe that I was worth more. And on and on. And again, it's the same thing with intelligence. People are brilliant, but then they become one-dimensional, right? They might have a PhD or a doctorate or a medical degree, but it doesn't mean that they feel smart because we're all victims of our bubble. What do smart people do? Well, they read books. They learn things. They feel intelligent because they're in this behavior of learning. So we want to have the image, and then we need behaviors that support this identity. So if you're doing this if you're thinking about this at home, an exercise that I think is powerful is to draw a giant circle. Sometimes I've had my clients do this. You draw a circle, and then inside the circle, you draw another little circle. And the little circle in the inside, you just want to write down the words that would describe your character that you desire, right? So like confident, intelligent, like compassionate. And you want to put those in the small circle in the middle. And then you want to think specifically from that position is you need to think the person that evidences compassion, a man or a woman that's compassionate, a man or a woman who's strong or intelligent. What are the behaviors that they are doing? Because as you can see yourself doing these behaviors, you will feel that you are becoming that person and you will live what you've come to believe, right? You believe it because you've belived it. But the behaviors condition the mind to develop this positive identity. And oftentimes people forget this because they do behaviors and then those behaviors reinforce a negative identity. And a lot of work in counsel is, in therapeutic work is done to try to improve behaviors so that we're not damaging the identity. Because identity really sets up psychological scripts about what can happen. And so you actually, if you have a pathological script to your life shrinks, right? So from a spiritual dimension, sin, especially mortal sin affects you at the level of identity. From a spiritual dimension, it pushes the Spirit of God out of you. And so what that does is it makes everything about you. all of a sudden you're consumed with yourself and you're consumed with fear. And so sometimes people are so consumed with fear, it's almost crippling for them to go to confession or encounter God. And life feels very fast and very urgent, right? Because you're very consumed with yourself. Very, very consumed with yourself. And so what we want to do is, again, that script, right? That script then is like doom, right? And so so that's why sin is so dangerous, especially mortal sin. And so the scripts that we do want that are positive, right? That are scripts of love, this image of the person I want to be at the end of my life is perfectly reflected by God. That keeps my life big. It actually keeps getting big. It actually keeps getting big even after I die. In many cases, you'll see saints, right? So one of the saints that was canonized, I think, a couple weeks back, maybe more than that, was Charles de Foucauld, and he was a French legionary. I don't remember if he was somewhere. I think it was Morocco or someplace. You can look him up. But he was kind of a bad boy and had some unique experiences earlier in life, and he decided to stay behind in Morocco and minister to the Muslims in that part of the world. And he became a monk, a monastic, and a priest, and then they eventually killed him. And he really didn't have a lot of converts. It's not like he was out there converting the Muslims. But I'm talking about him today, like 100-something years, 150 years later, maybe more, because he has had an effect on me. And maybe he'll have an effect on you if you look him up. So very much Charles de Foucauld is about his life was really about surrender, right? If you want to learn about his spirituality, Wilfred Stennison has a fantastic book. It's one of my favorite books about the spiritual life. Stennison is a Carmelite, but he has a book entitled "Into Your Hands, Father." I'll put it in the show notes, so you can pick it up if you want. It's a very powerful book about surrendering to the will of God. So again, if we're in relationship, we have to be able to formulate an identity, a positive identity, and figure out what are the behaviors. And we need to then start to put our lives in order so that those behaviors are either getting done or are easier to get done. So, to essentially, like, did I pray today? Did I work out today? Did I spend some time, doing my schoolwork or ordering my house or talking to my spouse or taking care of my children or whatever your state in life is? But you want to control the controllables, as they would say in the military, right? Control the controllables. But those controllables are connected to your identity. And this protects you. It protects you from feeling like people can diminish the quality of you, that they can somehow diminish your confidence. Yes, your spouse is depressed, but you need to be present to them. You don't need to abandon them and take it personal. Yes, your husband has a problem with whatever, his work, he's not maybe very patient with the kids, maybe he drinks too much, whatever it is. But you cannot lose all hope and get exasperated and fall to pieces about this. You have to keep yourself together so you can speak the truth and encourage him to straighten his life out. And so we cannot, again, it's super easy to fall off with this. So I'm not saying that this is easy, but it is done, and it can be done very well, and it can have a huge transformative effect. And so if you want to go deeper into these concepts, again, check out the program at heartsrenewed.org. And again, the modules there, especially in the beginning, right? And again, I strongly encourage people preparing for marriage to take a look at least module 1. Spend $1 and do module 1, because it'll transform like your experiences of early marriage and save you a lot of grief, in my opinion. Because it'll help you to grow up without having to fall into the quicksand and have to, or just fall into the the torrents of difficulty and not know what to do. You want to be prepared, and the stuff there is not stuff you're going to hear in pre-Cana. So what I encourage you to do is again, once you have that script of behaviors, right, then you have to start knocking those things down. So hopefully this kind of makes sense. Then that will help you, to be free to speak the truth. And this is a powerful thing, because this is what a lot of people come to me for, is they want assertiveness. Assertiveness is being able to convey the truth with confidence and love. Our job is really to promote the truth, and to promote the truth takes a sense of risk. It means that we have to be uncomfortable. It means that we have to be willing to grow. And it means that, like, people are not always going to find us lovey-dovey, right? So we have to surrender our image of, like, this desire to be liked. We have to get rid of this desire to always intensely be liked. And again, if you're listening to this and you have this intense desire to always be liked all the time, and it makes you super upset, when people are upset around you, or they say they're upset with you. And again, if people are upset with you, think about it. But again, people are responsible for their experiences in life. People have been upset before you were born, before they met you, before they knew you, before they married you. Their behaviors, their emotional control, their emotional regulation, that pre-exists that person coming into your life. I see parents say that to their kids sometimes, and I got to be careful if I say this to my kids, is to say, well, you made me angry, or you made me act like that. Well, that's really terrible to say to a child, because that convinces the child that your bad behavior is somehow their responsibility. We are not responsible for other people's bad behavior. That is irrational. That is not built in reality. So we got to stop thinking so. We got to stop fixating so much on it. So I want to challenge you, to really like get into this habit of communicating the truth, and how we do that is, oftentimes it's a lot easier to get into a habit of writing. Writing will allow you, writing down how you feel, writing down what you need, writing down what's occurred. Those three things, how you feel, what you need, what you believe has occurred, and then looking at it and looking for in your language where the judgment is, because the judgment is where people are going to lose you, in the sense that they're not going to understand. Because as soon as judgment enters into communication and language, it makes people experience criticism and not the truth. And we need people to experience, the truth. And so if you are, let's say, I'll give you an example of a woman whose husband has got a problem with alcohol, right? And her husband just won't stop. Her husband just won't stop the drinking. Well, again, she's got to think about who she wants to be at the end of her life, right? She's got to get that image underway. She's going to have to detach. That's a big thing. Detachment means that she's not going to use her husband as the vehicle for her confidence, because she cannot control his behavior. It's erratic. Sometimes he's sober, sometimes he's not. So she's going to detach from him. She's going to focus on the woman that she wants to be. She's not going to fixate on her kids if she's got kids, because that's dangerous. That puts a burden on the kids. Kids cannot be a replacement. I see a lot of people, their spouse is screwed up, so they make their kids their God. No, not good. God is God, and people are not. So you want to make sure that you have that image, that you have, the behaviors. Then she's got to start showing up every day. That little checkbox. Did I work out? Did I eat 3 meals? Did I pray for my husband? Did I take my children to the park? Whatever it is that she had to do. That will help to replenish the confidence. And then when her husband is sober and appears to be, and maybe he's not remorseful, but at least he's sober and is lucid enough to hear her, to say to him, well, to speak the truth. I love you, and your drinking causes a lot of fear in me, and it makes it very hard for me to see all of the wonderful things in you. And when you do this, it really causes a lot of difficulty for me to be the kind of wife that you'd like, and that I'd like to be with you and for our children. And I want you to know that, like, I desire to be close to you. And when you are not drinking, I feel way more relaxed. And when you're not drinking, I desire to be very close to you. And I want more of those moments. That's very different. And maybe that it seems wordy and it seems unnatural. And for many people, it is in a lot of ways, because there's so much emotion there. That's why I encourage people to write. And again, that's why a lot of my program, the online marriage program stuff, has writing involved, is because it helps to organize the mind. Feelings fade and consequences don't, right? So we really have to be mindful of how we're communicating. If that wife was to say, well, your drinking is destroying our family, and you're just a terrible father. I feel like you just don't even care about me. Well, that's probably, in some ways, that's an honest expression, meaning that that's how that they feel. The issue is that your spouse, is not maybe going to hear that the way that you want, and may not amend their life or respond the way you want, because what they're going to hear is the judgment and interpret it as criticism. But I mean, many men and women have expressed things very poorly, and then they get less of what they want. So hopefully this made sense for you today. And like I said, I really appreciate you joining me on this episode of Smuggling Hope as we're talking about how to break out of the eggshells and the idols of this life so that we move with confidence in the direction of the person that we want to be. And we abandon making people and things our gods, because again, you'll see this next time you go to confession. If you're a Catholic, confess the sin of idolatry. It's there in all of our lives, mine included. So we got to root this out. So hopefully you've enjoyed this. If you can, what I would encourage you to do is, after you listen to it, share this with somebody that might really benefit from it, or one of the clips that are, the instant clips there that, that usually are about a minute or less, if it's on Instagram or easy for you to share. Because that way we can spread interest in this, because people can have confidence in the relationships and more love and a freedom in their life. We don't want people's lives shrunk and fear-based and anxiety-based. So go out and smuggle some hope wherever you can. And if you can, teach somebody one thing that you learned from this episode. Okay, I'll see you back in a week.